There are two kinds of debt. There's good debt, there's bad debt. Good debt helps you get ahead financially. It helps you produce better cash flow, and it helps you take care of opportunities that come your way. Bad debt costs you opportunities. It produces poor cash flow, and it cripples you financially. Unfortunately, bad debt is more prevalent than good debt, and that's too bad.
At McPhee Insurance, we help people set up good life insurance policies. Many of our clients use these policies as part of their savings program. And if they have bad debt to pay off, they often use these policies to help them better manage their debt.
Good life insurance is one of the best tools to grow your wealth even while you're paying off debt. It's not immediately apparent though, because many people think you have to pay off debt before you can get a good policy. But that's kind of like saying, I've got to get healthy before I can lose weight. In reality, you do both at the same time.
So what is the answer to start paying off debt?
In order to start paying off debt, I think you first have to realize that you have a debt problem. And many people don't even realize that. I think of the guy that called you from Hawaii years ago, and he didn't realize that he had a debt problem, did he?
No, he was talking to me about how he had just started investing in real estate. And so, that seemed like a good thing. And then we talked about, did he have any credit card debt? And he started listing the credit card debt that he had. And we started talking about the monthly payment he was making on that. And I quickly saw a problem. I said, well, do you realize that your positive cash flow that's coming in from your properties is less than what you're having to make payments on those credit cards that he had borrowed from to purchase those properties in the first place? So here he was trying to buy an asset, but he was going in debt to do it. And he was he was paying more on the debt than what was coming in. And when I asked him if he realized that, he said, well, I appreciate your perspective. It wasn't just my perspective. It was black and white. Those were the numbers.
Yeah. So that's an example of something that a lot of people would say was a good debt, actually being a bad debt because it crippled him and his cash flow.
Yeah.
He was putting more out than what was coming in. And there wasn't a bright future there where that was going to change anytime soon.
No, it's not like, oh, wow, this property is going to assess for much higher very soon, and he's going to be able to sell it and pay off everything and have, there was no happy sunset coming anytime soon.
So when we're looking at debt, just because it's good or bad doesn't necessarily, we can classify all this type of debt as good and all this type of debt as bad. It's what happens individually with us. Where are we at in our cash flow? Where's our cash cushion? What are we doing as far as cash flow coming in versus cash flow going out? We've got to look at all parameters. Otherwise, we don't know if it's a good or bad debt.
And the good news is that many people can pay off their debt while they're building wealth simultaneously. It's not an either or choice.
That's right. I've seen people that have $20,000, $30,000 credit card bills every month, but they pay it off every month. That's good cash flow management. That's a good debt for them.
Mm-hmm.
Well, because it's a debt that's not carrying over every month.
That's correct.
Yeah. So oftentimes when we're talking about debt, bad debt, we're talking about consumer debt, credit card debt, where it's not being paid off every month. And so that interest rate is really biting into people's finances.
Yeah.
And we have to look at our spending and decide, is that really something that we need to purchase? Or can we keep from purchasing that so we're not increasing our debt?
So I like to look at debt as either performing debt or non-performing debt. And if it's not performing and putting you ahead financially, giving you better cash flow or open up opportunities for you, it's a bad debt.
Okay.
If it is doing all three of those things, then it's a good debt. And it's a performing debt because it's getting you ahead from where you are right now.
That's a nice way to think about it, because some people purchase real estate and that becomes a performing asset for them by creating cash flow that can help pay the mortgage back and grow their wealth. Other people, like this Hawaii guy, he buys real estate and it's not performing. And so he actually put it on his credit card.
Yeah.
to try and do that. And the cash flow that's coming in is not covering the payments on the credit card.
Or the people that go to a real estate seminar and put $50,000 down on a credit card without ever buying their first piece of real estate. They're already $50,000 in debt. And they may learn and they may not learn at that seminar what they need to do about wisely investing in real estate.
Yeah, that's a tough start.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, time is certainly going to pass anyway. And so if we can make the most of that time, leverage that time in order to get rid of the debt that we do have over time and to build wealth at the same time, we're automatically going to be in a better place.
And that's where you're talking about getting a whole life insurance policy at the same time that you're working on getting out of debt.
That's a fantastic way to do it. Yes.
And when we get that whole life insurance policy, it's developing high cash values, right away and continued. And we can use that for helping to pay off debt, or we can also use it as a cash cushion while our other funds are paying off debt. And I think about some of the use of credit cards. Sometimes people aren't buying properties with it, real estate. Sometimes they're not buying frivolous things. Sometimes things come up, health emergency. And they go to the doctor or to the dentist, whatever it is, and there's care credit offered there. And you can get some good deals on that care credit, so you can get the care you need immediately if you don't have a cash cushion somewhere else where you could just pay for that service.
Sure.
So that can be a situation where if you don't get your teeth taken care of, it's going to be hard to do anything else. And you can't wait to get out of debt to get your teeth taken care of, because that's a problem that has to be taken care of.
Well, I remember when we were first married and you were expecting John and you got very, very sick. And I remember coming home from work one day and just praying to God, what is going on? What can happen? I mean, you had lymph nodes that I'd never seen 50 cents in size all up and down the sides of your neck. I mean, you were trying to get rid of some toxin that didn't know where it was coming from. And that evening, I went out to work in the yard to do some things and came in to take a shower. And as I picked up the bath mat to put it into the washer, I saw that there were black streaks where the square tile had leaked up from the subflooring. And I knew what the problem was. That subflooring was of the air where there was formaldehyde in it. And you were staying home all day smelling that formaldehyde leaking up from a leak that had happened in our bathroom. And at that time, the only way that we could fix that was to go into debt.
Because we didn't have a cash cushion at that time.
We used our credit card. We bought the material. I pulled that subflooring out. We replaced it. And I remember you smiling at the bathroom door and saying, "Can I fix you lunch?"
Yes.
Already
I
feeling
felt
better.
so much different.
And we paid that debt off.
Yeah.
We purposed to pay it off. I mean, you toll painted. I cut out the pieces. We did extra things. We went to garage sales and resold stuff. We wanted to get rid of that debt right away, and we did.
And that's a case where we couldn't just wait weeks to get the money to pay for that, because I was sick, and you told me later you were thinking that you were going to have to take me to the hospital. That would have created even more bills. So to identify the problem and be able to quickly fix it, that was an okay use of credit cards. But then if we would have turned around and over the next few years done some of the upgrades around our home that we wanted to do, such as putting in a patio, adding a fence, putting in a larger sliding glass door, I guess it was just a window, air conditioning, all those things on credit card debt, that wouldn't have been a good thing at all.
No.
And we wouldn't have been able to put on the roof that we needed to put on if we'd have done all those things on credit card.
That's right. So then after we paid that credit card debt, then, we built up a cash cushion so we would have the funds for that roof
Absolutely.
and, for all those other things that we did to the house. So there's a time to use credit and a time not to use credit. So you want to be wise about that.
That makes me think of what Solomon wrote in Ecclesiastes. There's a time to cry and there's a time to rejoice. There's a time to go to war. There's a time for peace. And there's a time that you can properly use credit to your advantage, and then there's a time that you need to pay it off.
This is making me think of a guy I talked to just the other day. He said, I probably have more debt than I had just a couple of years ago because, we had some bad spending habits. So
Ah,
he had a plan to just get started paying it off, but he knew where the problem had come in. They just had some bad spending habits and had let those get away again.
And so we come back to the saying, time is going to happen anyway. What are you going to do? You want to be in debt forever? Or do you want to get out of that debt? Or is your debt going to put you in a better position in the future?
I really liked your example of performing versus non-performing debt. And most people could put credit cards in the non-performing bucket because that's a big expense, high
'em up.
interest
Put 'em in
rates
the freezer.
typically. Yeah, it's easy scapegoat. What about mortgages?
It depends. It depends on where you're at financially. There's nothing wrong with renting, but at the same time, everything you pay in rent is never going to come back to you.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, just having a mortgage doesn't mean everything is going to come back to you. You've got to sell that house or that property before it comes back to you, or you've got to lease it or something so that there's cash flow that occurs. I think Robert Kiyosaki says it best that your home is not your biggest asset. It's going to be probably your biggest expense in your life, but
Yeah.
it is your biggest liability.
And a lot of people know, I'm holding here in my hands an example of interest on a couple of mortgages. One at 3.5% interest on a $300,000 mortgage, you're going to 38% of the payments that you make over the 30 years for that mortgage are going to be interest.
Mm.
But if the interest rate goes up to 7%, doesn't seem that much higher. I mean, it is high, 3.5%, double that. In that case, you're going to pay 58% of all the payments that you make will be interest.
Oh my! So
And
the
you're gonna end
interest
up-
rate doubled, but the payments went up by 8% more than double.
Quite a bit, quite significant, because you're going to end up paying $230,000 more for the house at 7% interest than the one at 3.5%.
Yeah, yeah. And what a lot of people think is, oh, a mortgage bad, let's pay it off real quick.
Right.
But if you don't keep that money someplace where it's earning the rate that you were paying, you lost that interest anyway.
That's true.
and
And that's the unseen. People often don't see that part. They see the interest expense, but if they are able to get it out of the way, what is the alternate use for that money?
yeah, you have an emergency come along. You don't have a cash cushion because you've been paying off your house so quickly. So now you have to dip into credit cards and credit card debt, which is much higher interest rate. So if we think about getting rid of debt, I know that there's a couple methods I've heard of, the snowball versus the avalanche. So do you want to talk about that?
So the snowball method is going to be the simple method for paying off debt. Almost too simple. Because what they say is you look at the lowest balance that you have. So if you have a debt at $1,000 and a debt at $5,000, pay off the one at $1,000, even if it has a lower interest rate. And that has some reasoning to it, because once you get the smaller debt paid off, it frees up the payment, the cash flow that was going to service that debt. And now you can tackle the next size up and get rid of it a little bit faster.
It also gives someone a sense of accomplishment. I conquered one, now let's go after the others.
Yes. And so that can really help. It frees up cash flow quickly on the short end. But where it's a little too simple is because you will save more by paying off higher interest rates first. And so if the debts with low balances don't have the highest interest rate, you're not going to save the most money by doing it that way.
Mm-hmm.
But it is a good way to free up cash flow.
So we really need to combine those two. We need to look at the debt with the highest interest rate with the lowest balance so that we can conquer it first. Then we free up interest, we build our stamina and our confidence, and we also save more money in the long run.
Yeah, combining the two methods. And the other method you're talking about combining here would be referred to as the Avalanche Method, where you're going after that highest interest rate first. But let's take that example. If you go after all of your debts using the Avalanche Method, yes, mathematically you will save more interest over that time, but it may take you a long time to get any of the debts actually paid off.
Interesting. So if I'm thinking of an analogy here, let's say I have this garage that is absolutely a disaster. And I decide I'm going to clean it up, kind of like getting out of debt, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to clean it up. So if the snowball method, then I would find one corner of the garage, say, okay, I'm going to clean this.
Yes.
And
Next
then,
weekend you'll do the next corner.
yeah,
Yeah,
and
Sure.
eventually I might get that whole garage cleaned up.
But you start getting some fuel, seeing this corner clean. Oh, that's
That's exciting.
exciting.
Yeah, that is
Now
exciting.
I can see where this corner is going to get cleaned up, and this one, you get a vision for what's happening.
Okay.
And I can see the risk in this because now, as you clean the other corners, that corner is going to get cluttered too. Because that's
Yeah, because where you're going to put where you're moving from this corner is going to go back. Okay, yeah. So then the avalanche method, though, would be, all right, this garage is a mess. We are going to set aside time for this whole weekend, and we are going to clean this entire garage.
Mm-hmm.
And so we take everything out of it, and then we start putting things back in.
Major
And
surgery.
yeah. So it's an entire weekend. And when we get done at the end of the weekend, this garage is cleaned up, but we still have a pile of stuff that we need to donate, a pile of stuff we need to get rid of, a pile of stuff maybe we still haven't decided on. And let's just hope we got to the whole thing. But we still have these undone things.
Mm-hmm.
And inside, the laundry stacked up, the kitchen dirty dishes stacked up. Maybe we ate out, so we've got more trash and we're not feeling as good. We didn't sleep as well. We didn't get rested. Now we're going into the next week. So we're not totally done with this whole situation.
Yeah. Both methods have their pluses and their negatives.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to be creative and maybe use both methods, combine them together, like you said, John, and make it something where, the corner that we cleaned up first isn't a junk heap by the time we get the rest of the garage fixed up.
Yeah.
Or that we're overwhelmed with all the laundry and dirty dishes that accumulated because we took the whole weekend off to clean the garage.
Yeah.
So John has created many blueprints to help people get out of debt. After the break, John, I'd like you to share some of those scenarios with us. But first, this.
Did you ever play with a set of these rings growing up? They make a great visual picture of how you should set up your finances. On top, you have the higher risk investments, the lower risk investments. This ring is debt, this ring is savings, and this ring is protection. This stand represents the economy. If there's one thing we know about the economy, is that it will change, and it does, and this can change. It's unstable. What some people do when they set up their finances, they take and they go for the shiny, high risk, potentially higher yield investment. Now, potential return does not mean probable, and it is definitely not probable. So this doesn't perform as well as they hope, and they think they should add a more conservative investment that actually might return something. So they add that, and believe it or not, some people will go into debt for that. Add that to the debt they already have, and there's their debt ring right on top of that. If you are listening to this podcast, I hope that you have time to click the link in the description for the YouTube video, and we'll tell you where in that video you can see this demonstration, because it really comes alive when you see it. Well, you have these three negatives, these investments that aren't returning as well as you had hoped, and your debt, which is just a draw on your finances, and people think, I should probably save something. So they add savings to that. Then they look at what they have going there, it looks a little precarious, so they plop some protection right on top of that. Well, if there's one thing we know about the economy, is that it will change. It is uncertain and unstable, and as soon as it changes, you lose your protection and your savings, which are the two things you want to keep most. That's the importance of doing it right. Start with protection. That makes a nice foundation for everything else you do financially. Once you have protection in, then add your savings program so you can keep more of the money you make. Next, make sure your debt is handled. Pay off the bad debts, keep the good debts. A good debt is one that gives you a tax advantage or limits your opportunity costs and allows you to make money. Once that's handled, you can do an investment. Hopefully this is something you know about, because those type of investments that you know something about tend to return better. And if you have extra cash flow and want to go for one of those potential high risk, high reward investments, then you can do that too. Now, when the economy changes, you're much more secure. At McPhee Insurance, we specialize in helping people set up this layer, the protection layer, the foundation for what they do financially. We specialize in designing and selling whole life insurance that becomes this protection layer for you. It's a good foundation for everything else you do financially. If you need life insurance, or if you need to get a life insurance policy you already own reviewed, we can help you with both of those things. Contact us by phone at 702-660-7000, or you can email us, team@mcpheeinsurance.com.
John, what is the largest amount of debt that you have seen for an individual or a couple?
Probably $900,000 to $1 million. There's three cases that are coming to mind that fall within that range. And may sound interesting when I say this, but none of those three were out of balance with their debts,
So
as
it
much as some people that have less debt.
Oh, wow, that's interesting.
So you're saying they had mostly good debt
Mostly good debt.
that was
And it was
performing
well
for 'em?
managed, and they had the cash flow to manage it. The debt was not the biggest problem that they were facing.
So another question that's coming to my mind then is, what is the largest amount of bad debt that you've seen?
The largest amount of bad debt would be north of $500,000.
Wow.
And that debt had some student loans in it, which may be considered performing debt because they're using that to make their income, but a lot of it was credit cards and back taxes.
Ouch.
So I'm curious, John, those people that had the highest debt and those people that had the highest poor debt, how did that relate to their income? Was it proportional or was
It was proportional many times to their income, because you think about it, the credit card companies aren't going to let somebody with a relatively low income access enough credit to be able to rack up that much in bad debt.
So we're not talking
But-
about poor people that have just have a bunch of bad debt. It's mismanagement that gets them in debt.
It is the mismanagement. And one of the cases that I remember as being the hardest to get across to the customer that was wanting to get out of debt was a case where they were just trying to pay off a little bit more than $16,000 of debt. But they didn't have the call it imagination or the mental mindset to be able to see how that could be accomplished. They wanted it to be magically gone somehow.
They weren't willing to put in the work that's necessary to achieve their dream of being out of debt.
They wanted the magic wand to clean the garage for them.
Exactly. And so I think they're still carrying some debt today. But we have a lot of good stories as well. And the one story that comes to mind, this couple was paying off about $44,000 in debt. It took them about 2.5 years. They did it. And then they were in a wonderful position going into 2020 because they had not waited to pay off their debt in order to get their life insurance policies going. So they had not given up the protection, the savings of the first two layers in order to take care of their debt. They did both at the same time in a sustainable manner. And then when 2020 came along and their business was forced to shut down by the government mandates, they had the cash cushion in their life insurance. So not only did they take care of their debt, if they had waited, paid off their debt first, then started their cash cushion, they wouldn't have had as much there when 2020 came along.
And they probably would have reached for those credit cards that they had just paid off and racked up a bunch on them again because they had no cash cushion.
A lot of people did.
Yeah. I'm thinking of a couple that were struggling financially because of their debt, and they were able to get on the right track and approach their debt in a positive manner with discipline, and they were getting ahead on that financially so far that they were able to take a surprise cash cushion amount and give it to their daughter for the down payment on her house.
How cool is that?
Yeah.
And of course, you have to be careful with things like that. They were coming from a position of strength. They got their debt taken care of. They got their savings and protection in place. They were able to do that wonderful thing for their daughter. I've also seen it where parents want to do wonderful things for their kids, and so they go and get a student loan
They
in their own
co-sign?
name.
Yes.
They co-sign for their kid, and then that loan is very hard to manage later on, and it can actually cut into their retirement for the parent.
And the sad thing about that kind of debt is the child can defer the payments on that loan. They might even be forgiven their part
For
of that
their own
loan,
portion, yeah.
but the parent can't, and they can't even get rid of that loan through bankruptcy.
Yeah.
And so now they've bit into their own retirement savings because they were trying to do a good thing. And it makes me think of the scripture that says, do not co-sign, even for your children, if you don't have the money to pay for it, because we don't know the future. And yes, we expect our child to be very productive and we want to help them as much as we can, but that is probably not the best help because now that child is going to be forced to take care of those parents instead of those parents being able to take care of themselves financially in retirement.
Yeah. Well, even large amounts of debt, can be reasonable to tackle once you have a plan for it. I'm thinking of a couple that has about $200,000 to $300,000 of bad debt that they want to get rid of. I helped them just recently, figure out a way to do that in 4 to 5 years. and then they get their life insurance policy loans replenished in about 7.5 years from starting. So they haven't given up their cash cushion. They still keep a cash cushion all along the way, and that's getting rid of a huge chunk of debt. It's going to hopefully free this couple up to be able to buy a home.
I still remember one of the very first people that we helped get out of bad debt. And this was back in the time of fax machines.
Yeah.
Okay, that's how long ago it's been. And you received a fax, Michelle.
Well, she called me first. She said, Michelle, are you by your fax machine? I'm going to send you a fax. And I went to the fax machine. Sure enough, comes in, and she had sent me a copy of her balance that she owed, and it was at 0. And she was so excited because she had bought her life insurance to offer her the protection, the savings. Then she whittled away that debt. And now when she had her debt off, she wasn't starting at 0.
Nice.
And what we do to help people is we transfer their bad debt into a good debt by using the cash flows of whole life policy. And now the debt that used to be paying interest and principal to someone else can be redirected back to yourself. And that interest benefits you because you're a participating owner of the company you're paying interest to. And you're replacing the principal that you leveraged to get the cash flow to pay off your bad debt.
One of the things that I often do when I'm helping somebody with a debt payoff is I'll create an example. What if you just paid the debt off doing what you're doing now? And what if you go ahead and start the life insurance policy, get that layer of protection and savings growing for you, and you go after your debt? Sometimes it takes a few months longer to make that happen. It shouldn't take significantly longer. Okay, but sometimes it takes a few months. Once we get the balance right, it'll take a few months longer to make that happen. But then you have all three in order by the time you finish.
And that protection is so important. I was talking to a young father just last week, and having a child makes you think differently about money in the future. And he was saying, I need the protection while I'm paying my debt off, because if I don't have the protection and something happens to me, my children are going to suffer. My wife is going to suffer. And so he understood completely the protection comes first. And the component of savings in that protection and whole life insurance is built in. Now that gives him a better opportunity and more financial peace of mind to tackle his debts and get rid of those. And then when I showed him how, a lot of that interest and all that principal you're going to pay them is going to come back to you, he was ecstatic.
So student loans, I know we talked about a little bit before the break. How do you see those fitting into the picture? Is that a debt that should be paid off at some point?
Well, if you're a parent that's co-signed for a student loan, you need to pay it off, most likely, unless the interest rate is so low that it's not going to cripple you from saving for your retirement. If you're a student, then sometimes income-based repayment schedules may be beneficial for you if you don't get caught in the trap of saying, I can't earn that much money. Because ideally, producing more income is always better for you.
Yes.
You know, our CPA says, don't whine to me about paying taxes. You made more money or you would know it. Okay? So it's fine that way. But then sometimes loan forgiveness programs can be depended on. But we all have to take it into consideration. And so we typically classify student loans as part of our lifestyle, because without those student loans, you most likely wouldn't be in a position to earn the income you're earning right now.
And that's part of your past education, past experience that's going into that.
Comes like a mortgage or a car payment. It's hard to get to work without a car. You know, it becomes a necessity almost in our society.
Those income-based repayment programs can certainly work out on paper. And an example of the downside, I was working with somebody the other day who's keeping W-2 income relatively low. They are a business owner, so that gives them some more options on how much they can take out of the business, so they can get their personal income up higher than they could just with W-2. But still yet, the W-2 limitation limits some other tax saving strategies that they could have as their income rises.
Sure it does.
And
Or
so
the opportunities
it is a
they could
trade-off.
meet.
It is a trade-off. They might end up paying off their student loans to get out of that situation.
And of course, the loan forgiveness programs often don't take into consideration that, that loan is forgiven. Now it's considered income in the year it was forgiven. That's going to increase your taxes. So you have to figure out, well, what are taxes going to be 20 years from now when this loan is figured? And nobody knows that equation. We can kind of calculate what it has been, but
You got to put extra money aside for that.
Jordan was reading Ronald Reagan's autobiography the other day, and he was making a good salary in Hollywood, and 94% of it was going to the government.
Ouch.
Tax rates have fluctuated over the past, and in pre-1960, they were high. So are those coming back? Well, we don't know.
Yeah.
So it becomes an if situation, and a good plan might turn into a bad debt real quick.
So when it comes to good debts, what are some examples of good debt? Is a good debt always going to have collateral?
Well, when we moved to Nevada, we went into debt for a mortgage. And that was a good debt because it provided the lifestyle that we wanted. It was in our cash flow range. It was very comfortable for us to do that. And I said, I don't care if I ever pay this mortgage off. If they're just going to charge me this low interest rate and I get to live here and do everything I want to with this property, that's a pretty good deal.
Yeah.
That's using other people's money in a very profitable, performing way. And yet, as interest rates rose, and we looked at property here in Indiana, and the interest rates were between 7.5% and 8%, I go, whoa, now wait a second. That's a completely different subject. Other people's money is costing me more than what I really want to put out. And so we paid cash for this place because I didn't want to carry that high interest rate, just like you said before the break. That's going to more than double what we have to pay for our house.
So that's an example of a mortgage in Nevada that did have collateral being a good debt, but then a mortgage here that also would have had collateral wouldn't have been a good debt.
That's correct. That's why we can't just say, okay, a mortgage is always a good debt or always a bad debt. No, it depends. It depends on your cash flow. It depends on the interest rates. It depends on your situation. And everyone's situation is different.
So good debts often do have collateral associated with them, though, don't they?
They do. And of course, whole life insurance has collateral built up in it called paid up insurance. And that paid up insurance, which is like paid off insurance that you never pay a premium on again for the rest of your life, becomes your collateral, and the insurance company will loan you money on that collateral, charge you an interest rate, but allow your policy to continue to grow and earn dividends as if you hadn't collateralized it. That's a good debt. And so when we help people take their bad debt and transfer it to their insurance policy by collateralizing it, we've changed a bad debt into a good debt, because now they continue to get the benefits of the growth of the policy while they can then reschedule the payments back to themselves and maybe even make those payments more affordable because there's no time limitation on when that debt has to be paid off.
So managing debt properly is critical to your growing your wealth and having financial peace of mind. But if you have debt now, don't pay it off at the expense of your savings and protection, because that can cause financial stress.
If you have questions about your specific situation, you are welcome to call us. We specialize in designing and reviewing whole life insurance policies, but we often see debt resolved in the process, and we may be able to answer your questions.
Well, now that we've covered debt, which is the yellow ring on the stack, we're ready to talk about investments. We've got low-risk investments, the orange ring, and then on the very top, the speculative investments, the red ring. We're going to talk about both of those types of investments right here on Wealth Talks next week.